It was the summer of 1996, and the Bronx was burning with a different kind of energy. A heavyset Puerto Rican rapper named Christopher Rios, known to the world as Big Pun, was about to step into a small radio studio for an interview that would echo through hip-hop history for years to come. The Bronx had given the world the very birth of hip-hop in the 1970s, but for over a decade, Brooklyn had taken the crown, and Brooklyn's king was a man named Christopher Wallace, known across the globe as the Notorious Biggie Smalls. Two Christophers, two boroughs, two heavyweights, and one moment that would quietly change both of their lives forever. But the story you are about to hear is not what the magazines wrote. It is not what the rumors said. It is something much deeper, much more human, and much more beautiful than any feud could ever be. This is the story of a package, a cassette tape, and a kind of brotherhood that hip-hop did not know it needed. To understand what happened that year, we have to understand who Big Pun really was. Christopher Rios was born in the Bronx in November of 1971. He grew up in poverty, faced an unstable childhood, and survived years of struggle before he ever picked up a microphone. By the time he was 24 years old, he weighed nearly 400 pounds, and he carried the weight of his entire neighborhood on his shoulders. The Bronx had not produced a major mainstream rap star in years, and the Latin hip-hop community had been waiting, hoping, praying for a voice that could break through. Pun was that voice. His lyrical ability was undeniable, his wordplay was surgical, his flow was so technically impressive that even the most respected rappers in the industry would stop and rewind his verses just to figure out how he was bending the language. He was raw, ambitious, and hungry, and he believed with every fiber of his being that he was destined to become the next great heavyweight of hip-hop. In the spring of 1996, Pun sat down for a radio interview in the Bronx. The host asked him a question that every rising rapper hated and loved at the same time. Where do you see yourself in the hierarchy of hip-hop? Pun did not hesitate. He spoke from the heart, from the hunger, from the fire of a man who had nothing to lose. He said that he respected Biggie. He said that Biggie was the king, but he also said that the throne was not permanent, that every king eventually passes the crown, and that he, Big Pun, believed he would be the one to carry that legacy forward. He said it with respect, but he said it with conviction. The Bronx, he declared, would rise again, and the next heavyweight king of New York hip-hop would speak Spanish at the dinner table. The interview clips spread like wildfire through the streets of New York City. By the next morning, every barbershop in the Bronx was playing it. Every record store in Manhattan was talking about it. Every radio station in Brooklyn was reacting to it. Some people called it disrespect. Some people called it ambition. Some people called it the boldest statement a rookie rapper had made in years. The hip-hop media, always hungry for conflict, immediately framed it as a challenge. Headlines were written. Predictions were made. Everyone wanted to know what the Notorious Biggie Smalls would do in response. Would he go on the radio and fire back? Would he record a diss track? Would he address it on his upcoming album? Would he ignore it entirely? For 3 weeks, there was nothing, no response, no comment, no statement. Biggie was busy in the studio, working on what would become his second and final album. Those who knew him said he had heard the interview. Those who worked with him said he had even smiled when the clip first played in the studio, but he did not say a word publicly. The silence was deafening, and in hip-hop, silence is sometimes the loudest sound of all. Big Pun, meanwhile, continued to grind. He performed at small venues across New York City. He recorded verses for mixtapes. He worked with his mentor Fat Joe, who had been one of the first major artists to give Pun a platform. But behind the scenes, Pun was nervous. He had spoken those words from a place of confidence, but as the days passed without any response, that confidence began to feel heavier. Biggie was not just any rapper, he was the king. He was the man who had redefined what it meant to be a heavyweight rapper in the modern era. He was the storyteller, the lyricist, the icon, and Pun, despite all his bravado, deeply respected him. He had grown up listening to Ready to Die. He had memorized every line of Juicy. He had studied Biggie's flow the way a young pianist studies Mozart. The truth, which only his closest friends knew, was that Pun did not want to fight Biggie. He wanted to be acknowledged by him. Then, one Tuesday morning in late June of 1996, a package arrived at Big Pun's apartment in the Bronx. It was a plain brown box wrapped in standard shipping paper with no return address on the outside. The handwriting on the label was neat and careful. Pun's wife handed him the package and asked who it was from. He shrugged. He had been receiving fan mail for months now, and he assumed it was just another demo tape from a young rapper hoping to get noticed. He set it on the kitchen table and went about his morning. It was not until later that afternoon, when he sat down to open his mail, that he noticed something different about this particular package. The weight of it, the way it had been packed, the careful, deliberate handwriting on the label, something about it felt important. He opened the box slowly. Inside was a single cassette tape, unlabeled, wrapped in a piece of soft cloth. Beside the tape was a folded piece of paper, written in the same careful handwriting. Pun unfolded the paper and began to read. As he read, his face changed, his eyes filled with tears. His hands began to tremble. He read the letter 3 times before he could even bring himself to put it down. Then he picked up the cassette tape, walked to his stereo, and pressed play. What he heard for the next several minutes left him speechless. When the tape finished, he rewound it and listened again, and then a 4th time. By the time the sun went down that evening, Big Pun had listened to that cassette tape more than 10 times. He never told the public what was on the tape. He never released the contents. He never even told most of his friends. But he did tell one person, his best friend and mentor, Fat Joe. Years later, after Pun had passed away in February of 2000, Fat Joe would speak about that day in interviews. He would describe how Pun had called him that very evening, his voice thick with emotion, asking him to come over immediately. When Fat Joe arrived at the apartment, Pun was sitting on the couch with the letter in his hands, and the cassette tape still in the stereo. He looked up at Fat Joe with an expression that Joe had never seen on his face before. It was not pride, it was not anger, it was not even joy, it was something deeper. It was the look of a man who had just been seen by someone he deeply admired. The look of a younger brother who had just received approval from the older brother he had always looked up to. According to Fat Joe, the letter from Biggie was short, but every word mattered. Biggie had heard the interview. He had heard the comments. He had not been offended. He had not been angry. Instead, he had been impressed. He recognized in Pun the same hunger that had driven him to become who he was. He recognized the weight that Pun carried, both literally and figuratively, as a heavyset rapper trying to prove that body type had nothing to do with talent. He recognized the cultural responsibility that Pun was carrying as the first major Latin rapper poised to break through to mainstream success. And rather than respond with hostility, Biggie chose to respond with Brotherhood. The cassette tape contained a freestyle, but it was not a diss track. It was something Biggie had recorded alone in a studio, with no audience, no engineer, no one but himself and the microphone. He had recorded a personal message to Pun. In the freestyle, Biggie spoke about the responsibility of being a rapper from a marginalized community. He spoke about the loneliness of being at the top. He spoke about the importance of staying true to yourself even when the industry tries to change you. And then, in the final minute of the tape, he did something extraordinary. He acknowledged Pun by name. He said that he had heard Pun's verses. He said that the Bronx had a real one in him. And he said that whether or not the throne ever changed hands, what mattered was that the music kept moving forward. He ended the freestyle with a single line that Fat Joe says Pun would repeat to himself for the rest of his life. Biggie said simply, "The crown is heavy, brother. Make sure you're ready before you reach for it." Pun was destroyed by those words, not in a negative way. He was destroyed in the way that a young man is destroyed when an idol turns out to be even greater than he imagined. He had expected hostility. He had expected dismissal. He had even prepared himself in his quieter moments for the possibility of being ignored entirely. What he had never prepared himself for was kindness. He had never prepared himself for the possibility that the king would reach down, lift him up, and treat him as a peer rather than as a threat. For weeks afterward, Pun walked around the Bronx in a different mood. His friends noticed. His family noticed. Fat Joe noticed. There was a softness in him now, a humility, a sense of perspective that had not been there before. He stopped giving interviews where he positioned himself as the next king. When reporters asked him about Biggie, he simply said that Biggie was the greatest rapper alive, and that he hoped one day to be mentioned in the same breath. He never explained what had changed. He never told the public about the package. He kept that secret close to his heart, like a sacred thing that belonged only to him and to the man who had sent it. In the months that followed, Pun threw himself into his work with a new kind of focus. He began recording what would eventually become his debut album, Capital Punishment, released in 1998. The album would go on to become the first solo album by a Latin rapper to achieve platinum certification in the United States, selling more than 1 million copies. It was a historic moment for hip-hop. It was a historic moment for Latin music. It was a historic moment for the Bronx. And those who were closest to Pun would say that the foundation for that album, the spirit of it, the hunger and the humility and the determination, all of it traced back to that single cassette tape he had received in the summer of 1996. But the story does not end there, because tragically, neither of these men would live long enough to see the full extent of their legacies. On March 9th of 1997, less than a year after sending that package to Big Pun, the Notorious Biggie Smalls was killed in a drive-by shooting in Los Angeles. He was 24 years old. The hip-hop world was shattered. Big Pun was at home in the Bronx when he heard the news on the radio. According to those who were with him that day, Pun went into his bedroom, closed the door, and did not come out for 2 days. When he finally emerged, his eyes were red and his face was tired, but he was carrying something in his hand. It was the letter. The same letter Biggie had sent him a year earlier. He held it close to his chest, and he told his wife that he had lost a brother he had never even met in person. Pun would carry that grief for the rest of his life. Whenever he was interviewed about his musical influences, Biggie's name was always the first one out of his mouth. Whenever he performed in concert, he would dedicate at least one song to the memory of Biggie. Whenever a young rapper approached him for advice, Pun would tell them the same thing Biggie had told him. The crown is heavy. Make sure you are ready before you reach for it. In 1998, when Capital Punishment was released and exploded onto the charts, Pun made sure to thank Biggie in the liner notes. He did not explain why. He did not give details. He simply wrote a short, simple dedication to the man who had taught him what it really meant to be a king. Those who did not know the story behind it assumed it was just a respectful tribute from one rapper to another. But those who knew, those who had been in the apartment that summer day in 1996, understood what those words really meant. Big Pun's career soared in the years that followed. He became one of the most respected lyricists of his generation. He collaborated with major artists across the industry. He performed at sold-out venues. He won awards. He achieved everything he had dreamed of as a young man growing up in the Bronx. But he also faced significant health challenges. His weight, which had always been a defining feature of his persona, became a serious medical issue. Doctors warned him repeatedly. Friends and family begged him to make changes. He tried multiple times, but the demands of the industry, combined with the deep psychological challenges that come with rapid fame and lifelong poverty, made it incredibly difficult. On February 7th of 2000, Christopher Rios passed away from heart failure. He was 28 years old. He had outlived Biggie by less than 3 years. The hip-hop world mourned again, and many noted the strange, painful symmetry of two giants of the genre, both Christophers, both heavyweight icons of New York City, both gone far too soon. After Pun's death, Fat Joe found the letter and the cassette tape carefully preserved among Pun's most personal belongings. He found the letter folded the same way Pun had folded it that first day. He found the cassette tape still in its original cloth wrapping. He found a small notebook in which Pun had written reflections about the message Biggie had sent him. The notebook revealed something that made everyone who read it pause. Pun had written, on multiple pages over multiple years, the same line over and over again. "The crown is heavy, brother. Make sure you're ready before you reach for it." He had written it like a prayer, like a mantra, like a piece of wisdom that he was trying to internalize and pass on to others. In interviews after Pun's death, Fat Joe would describe the relationship between these two men as one of the most beautiful and least understood stories in hip-hop history. He would emphasize that the public narrative had been wrong. The interview that started everything had been framed as a challenge, but Biggie had never seen it that way. He had seen it as the natural ambition of a young, hungry artist who reminded him of himself. He had recognized in Pun a kindred spirit, a fellow heavyweight, a man who carried both the literal and figurative weight of his community on his shoulders. And rather than respond with conflict, he had responded with mentorship, with brotherhood, with grace. Fat Joe would also reveal that Pun had wanted to meet Biggie in person. He had been planning to reach out, to thank him face to face, to sit down with him and learn from him directly. They had even discussed the possibility through mutual friends. But the meeting never happened. Biggie was killed before they could ever shake hands. And that became one of the deepest regrets of Pun's life. The man who had changed his life with a single cassette tape was someone he never got the chance to thank in person. The story of the package and the cassette tape eventually became part of hip-hop folklore. Fat Joe spoke about it in interviews. Pun's wife mentioned it in documentaries. Other rappers who had been close to Pun confirmed details over the years. The actual cassette tape itself remains in the possession of Pun's family. It has never been released to the public. The contents of the freestyle have been described by those who heard it, but the audio itself has been kept private, as Pun would have wanted. Some things his family says are sacred. Some things belong to the heart, not to the marketplace. What this story teaches us more than 2 decades later is something that hip-hop and the world at large still need to remember. The narrative of conflict, rivalry, and competition has always been part of the music industry, but the deeper truth is that the greatest artists are often the most generous. They are often the ones who reach down and lift others up rather than push them away. They are often the ones who recognize talent in others and respond to it with respect rather than rivalry. Biggie did not have to send that package. He could have ignored the interview entirely. He could have responded with hostility, with mockery, with a verse on his album that would have crushed Pun's career before it even started. He had every right, by the rules of the industry at the time, to do exactly that. But he chose differently. He chose to see a younger version of himself in this young Bronx rapper. He chose to send a message of brotherhood instead of a message of war. He chose to be the kind of king that he himself had needed when he was coming up. And Pun, for his part, received that gift the way it was intended. He did not exploit it. He did not publicize it. He did not use it to elevate his own status. He kept it private, kept it sacred, kept it close to his heart. He let it shape him. He let it humble him. He let it guide him for the rest of his short, brilliant life. The crown is heavy, brother. Make sure you are ready before you reach for it. Those words became more than just a piece of advice. They became a way of living, a philosophy, a standard. Today, when fans remember Big Pun, they remember his lyrical genius, his historic platinum album, his incredible flow, and his cultural significance as the first Latin rapper to break through to mainstream success at that level. When fans remember Biggie, they remember Juicy, Hypnotize, Big Papa, and the dozens of other songs that defined an era. But the deeper story, the story that connects these two men beyond their music, is the story of that package. The story of two heavyweights who never got to share a stage, but who shared something far more valuable. They shared a moment of grace, a moment of brotherhood, a moment that proved, even in the most competitive industry in the world, that kindness still has a place. In the years since both men passed, hip-hop has changed in countless ways. New voices have emerged, new styles have evolved, new conflicts have come and gone. But every now and then, when an established artist takes the time to mentor a young rookie, when a veteran reaches out to a newcomer with a kind word or a piece of advice, you can hear the echo of that summer day in 1996. You can hear the echo of a brown package arriving at an apartment in the Bronx. You can hear the echo of a cassette tape playing in a quiet room. You can hear the echo of Christopher Wallace speaking to Christopher Rios, one heavyweight to another, telling him that the crown is heavy and that he should make sure he is ready before he reaches for it. Maybe that is the real legacy of these two men. Not just the music they made, although the music will live forever. Not just the records they sold, although those numbers were historic. The real legacy is the moment of human connection that passed between them. The moment when one king recognized another king and chose to respond not with a sword, but with a hand extended in brotherhood. If you ever wonder what hip-hop is really about, beyond all the fashion and the feuds and the headlines, remember this story. Remember the package that arrived at Big Pun's apartment in the Bronx in the summer of 1996. Remember the letter that made him cry. Remember the cassette tape that he played more than 10 times that first day. Remember the words that he wrote in his notebook for the rest of his life. The crown is heavy, brother. Make sure you are ready before you reach for it. Two men, two boroughs, two Christophers. One moment of grace that neither of them lived long enough to fully appreciate, but that has continued to ripple through the world of hip-hop for more than 25 years. Big Pun never publicly revealed the contents of the cassette tape, and his family has honored his wishes by keeping it private. But the message itself, the spirit of it has been shared, and it has touched countless lives. Because in the end, the greatest rappers are not the ones who fight the hardest. They are the ones who lift the highest. They are the ones who recognize that the throne is not made of gold or platinum, but of the lives they touch and the artists they inspire. They are the ones who understand that legacy is not about how many songs you sell, but about how many hearts you reach. And on that summer day in 1996, in a quiet apartment in the Bronx, two of the greatest rappers who ever lived shared a moment that proved exactly that. They prove that in a world that loves to celebrate conflict, sometimes the most powerful response is kindness. Sometimes the loudest statement is silence followed by a single, carefully chosen gift. Sometimes the most legendary moment in hip-hop history is one that almost no one ever heard about. And maybe, just maybe, that is the most beautiful thing of all. That the truest stories of greatness are not always the ones that make the headlines. They are the ones that pass quietly between hearts, like a brown package on a Tuesday morning, like a letter folded carefully on a kitchen table, like a cassette tape playing in a quiet room while a young man finds himself transformed forever by the kindness of a king he would never get to meet in person. That is the story of Big Pun and the Notorious Biggie Smalls. That is the story they never told you. And now, finally, you know.